What is going on, YouTube? Thanks for tuning into the channel. My name is Carlos, and today we are going to be talking about suspension. In particular, we're talking about tuning suspension, where we're talking about rebound, we're talking about compression, we're talking about preload. It's something that it was the first thing that I did on my new BMW S1000. I know it's got an acro exhaust. The bike already came with the acro exhaust and the tunes, so it's not something that I put on first. I've had this bike for a week and a half, and one of the first things that I did was get the suspension tuned to my weight and riding style. And it's one of those things I definitely recommend anyone that has a motorcycle. It's one of the first things that they should do with their bike. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today while we take a ride over to my buddy's house. It's the middle of the week. We have a poker night, so we're going to go and take a little cruise while we talk about suspension stuff. And while this bike, when I first got it, it was great, but it was set up way too stiff. It was a little too harsh to ride, like every single bump I felt. But now that I got the suspension tuned to exactly the way I want to, it actually rides so good, so smooth, while still being really sporty. So okay, we're gonna get on the bike, get going, and talk about this a little bit more. Turning the bike on. Just listen to that acro exhaust. This bike is an absolute joy to ride, and especially with that acro exhaust. I mean, here, listen to this, guys. It's just so good. I don't want to make too much noise, at least out here, and bothering people that are trying to wash their car. Or at least trying to wash their car. Let us get going and talk about some suspension. Now, I'm not any kind of expert here in regards to suspension talk and stuff like that. I just know enough to, I would call myself a little dangerous in regards to just knowing enough that getting your suspension tuned, especially to at least to your weight, is super vital. Especially if you're like a track day rider, and that's what I am. I'm a track day rider. I came from riding a track. I had aftermarket like suspension setup, K-Tech suspension. That made a huge heck of a difference. We're gonna get going real quick. It is a freaking beautiful day, but it's a little toasty. It's like 85 degrees right now, so I wanted to get moving, so I'm not just like baking in this heat. And there's a lot of traffic. Trying to bypass some of this traffic by going a different direction, but in any case, so okay. So suspension, why is it important to get suspension? It's important because in general it's going to like improve not only your handling in corners and stuff, but be able to improve just your general ride around bumps on the highway, all different kinds of sorts. And it's not just specifically to sport bikes, it actually pertains to even just cruisers and such. Although they'll have a different suspension setup, their suspension will be set up a little bit softer than, like, let's say a sport bike. But the fact of the matter is that pretty much every single motorcycle can get their suspension tuned, get to a person's weight and riding style. Just being able to handle corners and stuff like that even just better. And the big thing from it is that you're going to be feeling more confident in the bike. You're going to be feeling the bike talk to you, like literally just being able to feel what the bike is trying to respond and tell you, that you don't get if you don't have your suspension tuned to your weight and to your riding. Any true biker will basically attest to that. That's the basic cliff notes of why it's important to get your suspension done. But what is specifically getting done in regards to your suspension? So your suspension, when you're trying to get it tuned, basically comprises of 3 separate parts. You have what's called your preload, and then you have what is called your compression, and then you have what's called rebound. Now, the compression and rebound we'll get to in a moment, because that has to do with actual dampening, and that is essentially going to characterize how stiff or soft your suspension feels on the bike. So like I said, we'll get into that in a little bit, but what we need to first talk about is what's called preload. Now, preload is basically how much the actual springs inside your front fork and your rear spring, and how much they are initially compressed to be able to accommodate a rider's weight, along with the height of the motorcycle and how much travel there is going to be amongst fork, because the bike bounces up and down and it has a certain amount of what's called travel that it will compress these springs on the front and compress the spring in the back, and basically the preload is going to essentially dictate how much travel it is, and you want to have that preload basically even on both the front and the back. When you do, you have a bike that's in equilibrium and handles exactly how it's supposed to, at least to a rider's weight. Now, it's weight dependent because you're compressing the spring to a point where you get an ideal sag rate, which is basically how much the actual bike will compress when there's a rider on it, and you want the travel to be about 25 to 30% on average, from everything that I've read. So the preload is basically what's going to adjust for a person's weight and where the bike is going to sit, and you want to be able to have it sit in a spot where it's actually going to be in equilibrium based on like the height of the bike. Again, I'm not a suspension expert, just enough understanding to make myself dangerous, a little bit dangerous at least. It's a dark art. It's one of those things where you're just like, it's just like NASCAR, if you want to think of it that way. NASCAR doesn't feel, they just do everything by feel, and there's a little bit of there's a bit of science, but it's a lot of feel of what is right when it comes to motorcycle suspension. You can get initial setups done, and there's books for that, but when it starts to get into the nitty-gritty stuff, that's when you have like suspension experts and such. Now, one thing about the preload is that it doesn't actually make your spring have more like tension or compression. It just does a pre-compression, so it doesn't make your springs stiffer per se. And so if you're outside of the range of whatever your manufacturer has the spring rate to, that is how stiff or soft the spring is, then you have to get new springs to put in your bike. So people that are like heavier riders, if they're outside of the weight range that the springs are able to be adjusted to, then you have to get stiffer springs, or if you're lighter, then softer springs, etc. But generally, there's usually a happy medium that most riders can get their suspension adjusted to. If there's anything you take away from the preload, is that it's your initial setup for your suspension to get it to the point where it's handling the way it's handling the way it's supposed to for you as a rider, in regards to it, like the forks dipping down, compressing, basically the accepted amount of range of travel that you want for your forks, your rear suspension, so that the bike handles how it's supposed to. Now, cruisers are going to be set up a little bit more differently than sport bikes in regards to like travel. They're going to have a little bit of a longer travel, so they can soak up bumps a little bit better as compared to sport bikes, which are obviously more sporty and they have a little bit less travel because they're trying to maintain as much traction as they can on road surfaces, even if it's a little bit more bumpy. Now, once that preload is all set and ready to go, then the next thing is actually the dampening, or how much those springs are going to be compressed, where they're pushed down, or how much they're going to rebound or spring back up. So, and that's exactly what compression and rebound are in regards to suspension setup. You have your compression, which is basically how fast the springs get compressed, and then you have your rebound, which is how fast they spring back up. And basically that turns into what's called like low dampening and high dampening. Low dampening is when you have a low compression, low rebound, which gives you a softer ride, and then you have high dampening, which is high rebound, high compression, which gives you a stiffer ride. And it's trying to find that happy medium between stiff and and relax to be able to find what's going to be the best kind of setup for the kind of roads that you're on. If you're on a bumpy road like this one, you want your compression and rebound to be a little bit looser. But if you're on, like, let's say a racetrack, you want your rebound and compression to be a little bit stiffer, or your dampening to be a little bit higher. And that's ultimately what it comes down to for that. So for me, I have more of a sport track setup. So I have my springs, so I have my dampening set a little bit higher than average to give me a little bit better handling in the corners and such. And the sacrifice is that the ride's a little bit stiffer. Oh my god, I am baking in this sun here. I forgot that this freaking light takes forever to like get through. It's like 85 degrees right now, and it wouldn't be too bad if I was moving, but yeah, just not moving and then in a full jacket and gloves and everything, I'm cooking a little bit. Gotta love Texas weather. It's great when it's great, but it's also cruddy when it's, well, cruddy. So, okay, so I talked about doing suspension tuning, and obviously that's something that finding an expert is probably the next battle in regards to trying to, you know, get your suspension tuned, because generally it's one of those things that trying to find a good suspension person is actually a lot harder than it sounds. So for me, in the DFW area, I actually was really lucky in finding a suspension guy very, very early on, based on that he was doing suspension tuning actually at a sport bike event that was being hosted by Used Bike Direct over in the Dallas area. Eugene is his name. I'll put his information on the screen so that you can like check him out. He's definitely, at least if you're in the DFW area, he is the man in regards to trying to get suspension tuning done. But generally speaking, like, at least when it comes to characteristics of a good suspension person, this is what I've always found to be critical. Is generally the best suspension people are people that used to be racers, like that they used to actually go racing motorcycles, or they used to be on teams for racing. Generally speaking, is not something that you're going to find at any kind of dealership. You're going to have to look these guys up in regards to like the internet, and just sometimes even just social media, depending on where you live, that you might have to travel to, like, you might have to travel to certain parts just to be able to find one of these guys to do the suspension setup. And it's one of those things that's not physically difficult to do. It actually just requires you as the rider in probably full gear to get the best, most accurate reading in regards to like your weight and such. But yeah, generally the best ones that I found were people that used to be either racers or on race teams. And my guy Eugene, he used to be a racer, and so it's one of those things where it just makes a difference in regards to suspension, and the process for it only really takes like maybe 30-45 minutes. It's just knowing how to get everything set up the proper way. At least the preload is probably the one basic thing that maybe you might be able to find a dealership do, depending if it's a bigger dealership. They might be able to set up at least the suspension. But when it comes to like the rebound and dampening, it really is dependent on the rider, and that's where a good suspension guy is going to understand what the rider is looking for and be able to translate that into a setting that the typical regular rider is going to appreciate. Because everybody rides a little bit differently, and because of that, and that kind of setting for the rebound and compression can change. And it's one of those things that people that aren't really as savvy in regards to like suspension, or really don't want to deal with that, they just want to have one setting and be done with it. And then there's others that you can go in and adjust the settings and everything depending on what you're doing, whether you're just street riding or track riding. I'm not gonna make this light. Damn it. In any case, I think that's gonna wrap up today's video. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like this video, please check out any of my other videos, and we'll see you next time. Take care, guys.